"Come on, it's just a rumor," Mark said, his voice a mix of skepticism and bravado. "You don't actually believe that old house is haunted, do you?" "You know, Mark, people have seen weird things around here," Rachel replied, her eyes wide with a mix of excitement and fear. "Lights flickering, strange noises in the night. Who knows what's really going on?" The two friends stood at the edge of the overgrown lawn, peering through the gaps in the wrought iron fence. The old Victorian mansion loomed over them, its peeling paint and cracked windows hinting at the secrets it held within. Okay, Mark conceded, his curiosity piqued. "Let's check it out." He hopped over the fence with an ease that suggested he had done this before. Rachel followed more cautiously, her heart racing. As they approached the house, the air grew colder, and the shadows grew longer. The once grand structure looked eerie under the moon's glow, with ivy clinging to its sides like a living shroud. Rachel shivered, not just from the chill, but from the feeling that they were being watched. The creak of the front door was like a shout in the stillness. It swung open on its own, revealing a dark, dusty hallway that seemed to swallow the light from their flashlights. Rachel hesitated, her hand tightening on Mark's arm. "Maybe we should go," she murmured. But Mark, driven by a thrill-seeker's spirit, stepped inside. "What are you scared of?" he teased. "It's just an old house. Let's explore." The floorboards groaned beneath their feet, echoing through the empty rooms. They found themselves in a vast, dusty library, the shelves packed with ancient tomes and the smell of decaying paper filling the air. Rachel coughed, her eyes watering from the dust. "Look at these books," Mark said, his voice hushed with awe. "They're probably worth a fortune." "We shouldn't touch anything," Rachel warned, but Mark was already pulling a book from the shelf. As the dust clouded around him, a cold draft swept through the room, extinguishing their lights. Rachel screamed, and Mark's laughter died in his throat. In the sudden darkness, Rachel felt something brush against her leg. She jerked away, her breath coming in short gasps. "Mark, what was that?" I don't know," he stammered, fumbling for his flashlight. The light flickered back on, illuminating a room that was now eerily still. Rachel's eyes darted around, searching for whatever had touched her. "Let's go," she whispered, her voice trembling. "All right," Mark said, his bravado gone. They turned to leave, but the door was now blocked by something or someone. Rachel's eyes went wide with horror as she made out a faint, shimmering outline, a ghostly figure standing before them. The figure was a woman, dressed in tattered, antique clothing. Her eyes were hollow, her skin a ghastly pale. Rachel's heart felt like it was going to pound out of her chest. "Please," she whimpered, "don't hurt us." The ghost's eyes focused on Rachel, and she took a step closer, her translucent hand reaching out. Rachel stumbled back, tripping over a fallen chair. The ghost's hand passed through her, leaving a chill in its wake. It wasn't touching her, but Rachel could feel its presence, a coldness that seemed to seep into her very soul. Mark grabbed Rachel's hand and yanked her to her feet. "Run," he yelled, and they sprinted through the house, the ghost's wail following them. The floorboards beneath their feet seemed to come alive, twisting and rising to trip them. Rachel stumbled and fell again, her knees scraping against the rough wood. The flashlight cast jerky shadows on the walls as Mark dragged her along. They stumbled into a room that was colder than the others, a sense of malice thick in the air. The ghostly figure was gaining on them, its movements no longer the slow, deliberate steps from before. It was charging now, anger radiating from its form. They burst into the moonlit conservatory, the chilling wind from outside mixing with the ghost's icy breath. Rachel's eyes fell upon a set of double doors that led outside. There she gasped, pointing. They sprinted for the exit, the ghost's shrieks echoing in their ears. Just as they reached the doors, they slammed shut with a bone-jarring finality. Rachel's hand slipped from Mark's grasp as she was thrown against the glass. The ghost loomed over them, its form flickering like a candle flame in a storm. Rachel's heart stopped as she met the creature's empty gaze. It raised its hand, and Rachel watched in horror as the temperature plummeted. Ice began to form on the glass, spreading inwards, crackling as it grew. Mark grabbed a nearby plant pot and hurled it at the door with all his strength. It shattered, but the ice remained untouched. Panic surged through Rachel's veins as the air grew colder, the ice creeping closer. Mark looked around desperately, his breath coming out in ragged puffs. "We have to find another way out," he said through chattering teeth. They retreated into the house, the ghost's chilling laughter ringing in their ears. Rachel felt her strength waning, the cold seeping into her bones. They stumbled through the halls, trying door after door, each leading to more dead ends. The house felt alive, shifting and changing, trapping them in its dark embrace. As Rachel's vision blurred from the cold, she saw a faint light in the distance. There she pointed, her voice barely audible. They staggered towards the light, hope flickering in their hearts. The light grew brighter, revealing a staircase leading up. Rachel's legs felt like lead, but she pushed herself onward, Mark supporting her weight. The ghost's presence grew stronger, the air thick with malevolence. They reached the top of the stairs, the light coming from an open doorway at the end of a narrow corridor. Rachel could see the sky, a hint of freedom beyond. But the ghost was closer now, its breath cold against their necks. With a final surge of effort, Mark pushed Rachel through the doorway. She tumbled onto the rooftop, the cold night air hitting her like a sledgehammer. She looked back to see Mark face to face with the specter, his eyes wide with terror. The ghost's hand shot out and Mark was gone. Rachel's scream was lost in the wind as she stared into the empty space where her friend had been. The ghost turned its gaze upon her, and Rachel knew she was next. Her eyes searched the rooftop frantically. Above the doorway was a rusted fire escape leading to the ground. Rachel lunged for it, her hands slipping on the cold metal. The ghost's chilling touch grazed her shoulder, sending a wave of pain that made her cry out. She clung to the ladder with a desperation she had never felt before. Her trembling hands found the first rung, and she began to climb down, one step at a time, feeling the ghost's breath on her neck with each descent. Rachel's teeth chattered uncontrollably, and she couldn't feel her fingers anymore. As she reached the bottom, Rachel's foot slipped. For a heart-stopping moment, she hung in the air, the ground rushing up to meet her. Then she felt something grab her arm, firm and warm, and she was pulled back to safety. She whipped around to face her savior, but there was no one there. The ghost's scream echoed from the rooftop, and Rachel realized it had been Mark's hand that had saved her. She didn't have time to process the impossibility of his survival as the ghost's anger grew louder, shaking the very foundations of the house. They stumbled away from the mansion, Rachel's legs barely holding her up. The house's windows exploded outward in a shower of glass, and the ghost emerged, floating in the air above the shattered roof. Rachel and Mark didn't dare look back, their hearts pounding in their chests as they sprinted into the night. The chill from the ghost's touch slowly receded, replaced by a burning fear that fueled their escape. They didn't stop until they were a safe distance from the house, panting and trembling. Rachel leaned against a tree, trying to catch her breath. "What do we do now?" she gasped. Mark's voice was shaky. "We tell everyone what happened. We can't let anyone else go in there," Rachel nodded, her mind racing. The house was alive, and it had taken Mark. She had felt his hand, cold and solid, but she had seen his fear when he vanished. They made their way back to town, their footsteps heavy with dread. Rachel knew they had to do something to put the ghost to rest, to save Mark from whatever fate had befallen him. But as they walked, the reality of their situation set in. They had just encountered the supernatural, and it had bested them. The town lay quiet, oblivious to the horror they had witnessed. Rachel and Mark approached Rachel's house, the porch light casting a warm glow onto the sidewalk. Rachel's mother was waiting at the door, her expression a mix of relief and anger. "Where have you two been?" she demanded. Rachel's voice was weak. "Mom, we found the ghost. It's real, and it's not letting us leave." Her mother's face paled, and Rachel realized with a sinking feeling that she had heard the stories too. They weren't just kids playing a game anymore, they were caught in a nightmare that had been haunting this town for generations. The house loomed in the background, a silent sentinel of their terror. Rachel knew they had to find a way to free Mark, to put an end to the curse that held the ghost within. But as they stepped into the warm embrace of Rachel's home, the coldness of the ghost's touch lingered, a grim reminder that their ordeal was far from over. Rachel's mother listened in shocked silence, her eyes darting between her daughter's trembling form and the ghostly figure that hovered just outside the porch light. She had always dismissed the town's whispers as mere folklore, but now, faced with the stark reality, she knew they had to act. They gathered around the kitchen table, sipping hot tea in an attempt to warm their bodies and soothe their frayed nerves. Rachel recounted every detail of their terrifying encounter, her voice cracking as she described the ghost's rage and the icy prison it had trapped Mark within. Rachel's mother, her own fears laid bare, reached out to hold her daughter's hand, offering what comfort she could. They decided to seek help from Mr. Thompson, the town's eccentric historian. His house was filled with dusty relics and books that held the secrets of the town's past. Maybe, just maybe, he had something that could help them. Rachel clutched at her mother's hand, her heart racing as they approached the mansion once again, the ghostly figure nowhere in sight. Mr. Thompson, a man with a wild beard and piercing eyes, listened intently to their story. He nodded solemnly and led them to a bookshelf that stretched from floor to ceiling. Here, he said, pulling out a leather-bound tome. This is the journal of the house's original owner, Isaac Blackwood. It may hold the answers we need. The pages were brittle, the ink faded with time, but Rachel and her mother read through the entries with a fervent hope that grew with each turn of the page. They discovered that Isaac Blackwood had been a man of science, dabbling in the arcane. His obsession with capturing the essence of life had led to his own tragic demise, and the house had become a prison for his vengeful spirit. The journal spoke of a ceremony, a ritual that could banish the ghost for good. It required a rare herb, the tears of a morning willow, and the light of a full moon. Rachel felt a surge of determination. They had found their way to save Mark, but the full moon was still days away. Could they survive the ghost's wrath until then? The town rallied around them, sharing their own whispers of the mansion's dark past. Rachel and her mother gathered the required items with the help of those willing to face their fears. They knew that time was of the essence. With each passing moment, Mark was lost further to the cold embrace of the ghostly realm. As the night of the full moon approached, Rachel and her mother returned to the mansion, armed with the ancient knowledge and the town's collective hope. Rachel clutched the jar of morning willow tears to her chest, her heart pounding like a drum. The ghostly figure watched them from the shadows, its eyes burning with a cold, malevolent flame. They entered the house, their steps echoing through the hollow halls. The air was thick with the scent of dust and despair. Rachel's mother held a candle, casting a flickering light that danced on the walls. Rachel could feel the house's energy, its very soul pulsing with malice, but they had come too far to turn back now. They reached the library where it had all begun. Rachel could almost hear Mark's laughter, a ghostly echo of happier times. They set up the ceremony, the candles casting a sacred circle of light around them. Rachel's mother recited the incantation, her voice steady and sure, as Rachel sprinkled the precious tears around the room. The air grew colder, the house groaning in protest. The ghostly figure of the woman grew more solid, her eyes no longer hollow but filled with a fiery rage. Rachel stepped forward, the herb in hand. "Isaac Blackwood," she called out, her voice shaking. "We free you from this torment." The ghost's scream was deafening, the house shaking as the spirit fought against the ancient words. Rachel felt a force pulling at her, trying to drag her into the cold abyss. But she stood firm, her love for Mark giving her the strength she needed. The ghost's form began to waver, the coldness in the room growing so intense that Rachel's breath crystallized in front of her. She took a deep breath and stepped closer to the spirit, raising the herb high. "Be at peace," Rachel whispered, and tossed the herb into the heart of the shivering vortex of cold. The reaction was immediate and violent. A blast of freezing air sent books and furniture flying as the ghost let out a wail that seemed to shake the very foundations of the mansion. Rachel stumbled, the power of the ritual taking her by surprise, but her mother's firm grip kept her upright. They watched in horror as the ghost grew more solid, its anger palpable. And then, just as suddenly as it had come, the cold receded. The ghostly woman looked around, her eyes searching the room, and Rachel felt a moment of connection, of understanding. The spirit was in pain, trapped by its own anger and grief. Rachel stepped forward again, her hand outstretched. "Please," she begged, "let Mark go." The ghost's expression changed, the rage fading into something almost human. It looked at Rachel, then at the jar in her hand. With a tremble, Rachel offered it the last of the morning willow tears. The spirit took it, the glass passing through its insubstantial form without breaking. As the tears hit the floor, a soft, green light began to spread, pushing back the shadows and the cold. The ghostly figure of Mark appeared beside Rachel, his eyes filled with an unspeakable sadness. Rachel's heart swelled with relief, and she threw her arms around him, but his body remained cold, unyielding. He looked at her, his voice a whisper on the wind. "You have to finish it," he urged. "Free her, and she will free me." Rachel nodded, her eyes never leaving Mark's. She turned back to the ghost of Isaac's wife, now standing before them, the light from the full moon streaming in through the windows. Rachel's mother spoke the final words of the incantation, and the spirit began to glow, the light enveloping her until she was a being of pure, radiant energy. The air grew warmer, the house's anger subsiding. The ghost of Mark looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. Rachel felt the icy grip around her heart loosen, and she watched as the spirit of his killer began to ascend, the light guiding her up through the shattered roof and into the night sky. As the ghost disappeared into the moon's embrace, Mark's form began to solidify. Rachel felt his arms wrap around her, his warmth seeping into her frozen bones. They clung to each other, tears of joy and relief mingling with the last remnants of fear. The house was still, the night outside silent, but for the distant howl of a lonely wind. Rachel knew they had done it. They had freed the ghost and restored peace to the mansion. But as she looked around the room, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. Turning to her mother, Rachel saw the look of realization dawning on her face. The journal had spoken of a price to be paid for meddling with the spirit world, a cost for the life they had taken back from the dead. Rachel felt the warmth of Mark's embrace falter, and she knew what was coming next. The house creaked and groaned, the walls closing in as if to swallow them whole. Rachel's mother's eyes went wide with terror as the candles flickered and died. Rachel held Mark tightly, whispering to him, "I'm sorry," as the darkness consumed them. The house stood silent once more, the only evidence of their presence the shattered glass of the conservatory doors and the cold, dead plants that lined the floor. Rachel and Mark were gone, claimed by the very spirit they had sought to save. The town spoke in hushed tones of the night the Blackwood Mansion had finally claimed its due, the night the living had stepped into the realm of the dead and paid the ultimate price. The house remained, a stark reminder of the line that should never be crossed, the price of curiosity, and the cold embrace of the vengeful dead.